My blood doth rise in the roots of yon oak, her sap doth run in my veins, boundless my soul like the open sky, where the stars forever have lain. Where the stars, where the stars, where the stars forever have lain. My hands hold the weavings of time without end, my sight as deep as the sea, beating my heart sounds the measures of all that of love's eternity. That of love, that of love, that of love's eternity. I feel the tides as they answer the moon, rushing on a far distant sand, bringing my song is the wind of my breast, and my love goes over the land. And my love, and my love, and my love goes over the land. My foot carries days of the old into new, our dreaming shows us the way. Once our faith settles deep in the earth, rising green to bring a new day. Rising green, rising green, rising green to bring a new day.
Here every other Sunday, and he was here last week. This week.
Good morning
Okay. I guess we're gonna
and
tell you
welcome. One second, we may have a little bit of a technical issue that I'm going to help with. Okay, do you hear it now? Oh, I know why. So good morning again. I apologize for the sound. We had an issue this morning with our portable amplifier. When I went in to bring it out, I found that the microphone that it normally is connected to, somebody had ripped the wire out of the head of it. So we don't have a sound system this morning, so we're going to have to trust my booming voice to be able to carry us this morning. As I said, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Meriden. Our minister, Reverend Tony Lorenzen, is preaching at our sister congregation, Mattituck Unitarian Universalist Society, this week. For the most important news about what's happening here, please see the announcements that the reel that plays before the service online and will play again after. You can also check out our email newsletter, which you can sign up for on our church website. Normally at this time I would ask folks to silence their electronic devices, but given the environment out here, we probably can forego that little formality. Also, given the fact that it's a little breezy out here this morning, we're not going to light an actual flame, but we'll use our virtual flame. I promise you it's burning. And we gather this morning in anticipation of new connections, of new ways to find community. And we light this chalice, the symbol of our faith, in anticipation of all that can mean and the possibilities that it brings. At this time, we're going to try singing, Alan. We're going to sing the song from the Big Blue Hymnal. It's number 301, Touch the Earth, Reach the Sky. The earth reach the sky,
Walk the shores, the spirits fly, over the ocean, over the land.
and our faith a quest to understand. Touch the earth, reach the sky, children ask the reasons why. In our lives the answers show, and by our love they learn and grow. Touch the earth, reach the sky, hug the laughter, feel the cry. May we see where we can give, for this is what it means to live. Touch the earth, reach the sky, soar with courage ever high. Spirits joining as we fly, to touch the earth, to reach the sky.
Touch the earth, reach the sky, soar with courage ever high. Spirits joining as we fly, to touch the earth and reach the sky.
Can everybody hear me okay? I'm using my best outdoor voice this morning.
You're doing a fine job.
There you go. This point in the service, what we normally do is we share something we call a story for all ages or a time for all ages. And given the fact that all of us here are somewhere within a particular age range, what I'm going to do this morning is I'm sort of going to integrate that together with the main message, because it really goes and helps frame the message. What I'm going to be talking about this morning is connecting outside of the various bubbles that we find ourselves coalescing into in society today, whether that's amongst friends, co-workers, family, online, certainly in social media. The evidence of the bubbles that exist are pretty clear. And over the last week or so, I've seen, and perhaps some of you who do follow social media have seen this as well. It's a funny little parable that's been circulating. It's the story of a tiger and a donkey, and they're in a disagreement. See, the donkey keeps insisting that grass is blue, and the tiger keeps telling him, no, the grass is green. And they go back and forth on this, with the tiger the donkey just continuing to say, no, grass is blue, grass is blue. I've seen it, I've read it online, grass is blue. Finally, the tiger picks up a Granny Smith apple. Where the tiger was carrying a Granny Smith apple, I don't know, but he picks up a Granny Smith apple and he shows it to the donkey and he says, donkey, what color is this apple? And the donkey says, it's green. Okay, well, it's the same color as the grass. He says, no, the grass is blue. The grass is blue. The grass is blue. Well, as the tempers start to flare and they start calling each other nasty names, finally the tiger says, let's take our dispute to the lion. He's the king of the forest. We'll let him decide. So they go off to find the lion in his den. And as they approach the lion's den, the donkey goes in and starts trotting forward. And he runs up to the lion and he says, Your Highness, help us solve this dispute. This silly donkey over here keeps, this silly tiger over here, I'm blowing my own story. This silly tiger over here keeps insisting that grass is green. And I keep telling him that it's blue. It's blue, so you have to decide this for us. And the tiger, or the lion sits there, getting my animals straight. So the lion sits there and contemplates for a moment. He turns to the donkey and he says, so if you believe the grass is blue, then it's blue. And the donkey screams, the grass is blue, the grass is blue, the grass is blue. Now, lion, you must punish this silly tiger who's been bothering me and pestering me about the grass being green. And the lion thinks about that again for a moment. He says, very well, the tiger shall be punished with 3 days of silence. And the donkey, of course, goes, hurrah, hurrah, and he goes bounding off, screaming, the grass is blue, the grass is blue, the grass is blue. And once he's sort of out of earshot and out of sight, tiger turns to the lion. He says, why are you punishing me? Grass is green, after all. Lion says, this has nothing to do with whether grass is blue or grass is green. What this is really about is the fact that, number one, if this is punishment, it's for degrading yourself because a noble beast such as you should not be arguing with an ass. And on top of that, you came and you bothered me with this question just to validate something that you already know to be true. Well, the moral of the story, according to the version that's circulating online right now, is that the biggest waste of time is arguing with fools and fanatics who don't care about truth and reality. And the only victory that they care about is the validation of their beliefs and their illusions. They just want to win the fight. I'm not so sure I'm in complete agreement with that version of the moral, however, because although sometimes arguing the braying donkeys in our midst often seems pointless, it's hard to watch as their proclamations, which are generally of far more consequence than the color of grass, do actual harm to people, they do harm to our civilization, and to our planet itself. In the face of misinformation and disinformation circulating as to the cause of rapidly escalating climate change, the reality of a devastating global pandemic that's killed over 4.5 million people worldwide in less than 20 months. Think about that for just a second and let that sink in. The necessity of wearing masks and distancing measures to combat the spread of this pandemic, the efficacy of vaccines proven to prevent serious illness, hospitalization, and death, not to mention the assaults on advances to justice and equity in society, it's easy to feel hopeless. We can and have done our best to illustrate the realities surrounding these issues to those who so often seem to live in an alternate universe, but typically to no avail. The donkeys in our midst still demand that the grass is blue and will provide whatever evidence they can research on the internet as proof, and demand that the lions, and perhaps those are foxes, who validate their lies despite the evidence that's readily available to them, are the real leaders. We are now a nation of bubbles. And while it's easy to characterize them as blue bubbles and red bubbles, the reality is far more complicated than that. What is obvious is there isn't much real conversation outside of these individual bubbles. We don't tend to talk outside our bubbles, and the other folks don't tend to talk outside of their bubbles unless it's screaming at each other. Now, it's quite easy for me to stand here and talk about how vaccines that science has developed combat COVID-19, and that they're the best way that we have out of this pandemic. We can talk among ourselves about the need to drastically cut down on the use of fossil fuels before the damage done to our climate is irreversible, to whatever extent it is not already irreversible. We can preach to our own choir about injustice and economic inequality and propose solutions that we all agree should be enacted. The problem is, as long as a sufficient percentage of our population demands that the grass is blue and refuses to consider any alternatives, as long as the donkeys around us, the donkeys who occupy and stay within their own bubbles and listen only to the lions who confirm their narratives, remain convinced that insisting that the grass is blue or red or purple are not talking to us or listening to us, but instead defining us as being evil and dangerous, we'll never resolve the very real and pressing problems that we face. George Packer, who wrote in The Atlantic a couple of months ago, described the bubbles that we have divided in terms of different narratives. Each of these narratives tells a different story of what it means to be an American. Each of the stories, as Packer describes 4 of them, articulate their own versions of morality, of values, of identity, and to some degree, of reality. None of these bubbles can be understood in the absence of others, and in fact, to a greater or lesser degree, they overlap in places, much like soap bubbles from a bubble wand. I was going to bring bubble wands today, but I was late getting out of the house, and it's like they're still sitting on the dining room table. I thought it was going to be fun for everybody to be waving bubble wands. Oh well. But much like soap bubbles from a bubble wand often conjoin like a physical manifestation of a Venn diagram. Packer describes these bubbles as free America, smart America, real America, and just America. The bubbles are not new. The argument over the degree to which individual liberty must make way for communal responsibility is as old as America itself, even if the descriptive metaphors have evolved over the years. So it is with the distrust between those of the elite class who can avail themselves of the benefits of arts, science, technology, higher education. The wind is conspiring against me as well. And those who worked in the fields, dug the mines, and labored on the factory floor. We Unitarian Universalists often struggle amongst ourselves. Because remember that our heritage has its roots firmly in Packer's smart America. That's the smart America of the educated elite, and our Unitarian, particularly Unitarian forebears, were part of that class. And all too often we find that some of what goes on in smart America comes face to face with the portion of our identity that rejects meritocracy and the other aspects of that are inherent in our elite roots. And it comes face to face with the ideals of justice and equity that our principles demand of us. It's sort of like that, let's go to that march, but oh, by the way, let's go back and check the value of the 401k just to make sure that it hasn't, right? So the bubbles that we're talking about here are not new, but the walls of the bubbles have ossified. And as they have, what were commonly held as social norms of restraint and decency, of civility, have dissolved to the point that rancor and insult that was once unthinkable is now not only commonplace, it's acceptable. It's acceptable. to call people you don't even know a nasty epithet. So whether it's the free America of ossified libertarianism, whether that's a small L libertarianism or a big L libertarianism, the smart America of privileged education, suburban neighborhoods, and credentialed mediocricy, the real America of farmers and factory workers, of small-town main streets and evangelical churches, or the just America railing against the hypocrisy of smart America and yet oh so deaf to the antagonism and rigidity inherent in its messaging, these four Americas have more in common with each other than any of their denizens would want to admit, and yet are increasingly isolated from and antagonistic to one another. And to whatever extent these four Americas, these four bubbles, each have their own narratives, I think more essentially, each one of them has their own languages. And that's what makes it so difficult to communicate outside of our bubbles, right? It's one thing to disagree about the color of grass, and one can argue this is a matter of perception or where on the prismatic scale blue fades to green and green fades to yellow. But if we don't even agree on the meanings of the word green or yellow, and if what I call grass is what you call a weed, or what I call a donkey, you call an ass, we have a much stickier problem that we have to resolve. If we can't come to a common understanding about reality, about what is truth, and therefore are unable to talk outside of our identity bubbles, we are in serious trouble as a nation. Oh, by the way, we are in serious trouble as a nation. Expecting that this is going to get fixed by forcing people in those other bubbles to join ours is folly. Screaming at each other across the space between the bubbles is useless, and while we cannot remain silent in the face of the actual harm being done, of people suffering and dying, of what is now an almost entirely preventable pandemic, of damage being wrought upon our planet, manifesting itself in one record-breaking storm, wildfire, drought, or flood after another, after another, after another. Perhaps 3 days of silence, not as punishment, but as a time of reflection, might be in order. There may be some wisdom in the lion's verdict after all. Divide and conquer is among the oldest strategies of despots and dictators, often first attributed to Philip II of Macedon in the 4th century before the Common Era. When those you would subjugate cannot even talk to one another, those holding the mantle of power can rule with impunity. We just spent 4 interminable years watching this principle demonstrated by a master of the technique, attacking not only the norms of civilized society, but the very nature of reality itself. And while he is no longer seated upon the throne, we see this would-be dictator continuing to polarize society, and those who would profit from the division are willfully playing along. To the extent that we play along, we are accomplices. My first and foremost response to all of this, and this is a realization that I've come to over the last 6 months or so, is I'm just refusing to play along. I'm not going to play the game anymore. As the lion in our story knew very well, arguments about the color of grass are almost never about either color or about grass. This doesn't mean that I avoid challenging falsehoods or speaking truth. But when the conversation devolves into distraction and unrelated side arguments, I exit stage right. Where's that left for you? My first and foremost response is a set of rules that I've adopted. Rule number 1, whether on social media or in in-person conversation, refuse to engage in ad hominem attacks. Nobody pays attention to somebody who calls them an ass. As satisfying as it may feel sometimes, it accomplishes nothing and typically precludes any future productive conversation. In fact, I found myself defending people who have said completely stupid and hurtful things when someone else responds with a personal attack. Please don't attack Fred. He and I disagree, but we've agreed to treat each other with civility. Civility. It really shouldn't be a quaint notion, should it? Rule number 2. Find common ground with those you disagree with. The more you disagree with someone, the more important this rule becomes. The reality of the 4 narratives is if you chart them on a Venn diagram, you will find that there are more commonalities than you could even imagine. Rule number 3, when engaged in debate, ask questions, as opposed to attempting to refute the other person's point. Because all that's going to do is create an argument, and you're going to go down that rabbit hole. And I spent a long time going down so many rabbit holes, I think I've become friends with the March Hare on a personal basis. This is particularly useful when it's apparent that the other person is simply trolling. You know, it's much easier to do the online portions of these when I'm sitting in my studio at the house. Microphones aren't blowing around. Papers aren't leaving me. This is particularly useful when it's apparent that the other person is simply trolling or attempting to generate outrage, using ambiguous terms to incite arguments or to throw red meat within their own bubbles. Rule number 4, call out intentional divisiveness, even when it's from our side. Divide and conquer always works to the advantage of those who would control, never to the advantage of those who would heal. And finally, rule number 5, and this I think is the tricky one. To me, it's the hardest. Look for ways to engage those you disagree with in conversation. It's hard. It's very, very hard. It's also the only way that we have a chance to bring about meaningful change and pull ourselves as a nation and as a world from the brink of disaster. We all read how our culture has become so fractured that there's no hope of ever bringing it together again. We hear the prophets of doom and despair tell us that the great American experiment has failed and that we are in an inevitable spiral into chaos. It's easy to fall into the trap of believing, and we here to a very large degree live at the nexus of smart America and just America. The nexus of the privilege that many of us come from, and that certainly a lot of our Unitarian Universalist heritage comes from, and what we are now trying to do to make the world a better and more just and more equitable place. And sometimes we watch helplessly as the loud voices who deny science use the megaphone of technology to preach to the denizens of free America and real America that climate change isn't real or isn't caused by our addiction to fossil fuel, that vaccines are somehow dangerous, ineffective, or part of some sinister plot to deprive individuals of liberty and agency over their own bodies. Never mind the fact that those same people don't seem to have a problem with denying women agency over their own bodies. We watch in disbelief as millions are misled by the lies and convinced that their interests are served by maintaining an uncomfortable status quo where health care is only available to those who can fill the coffers of insurance companies, and where financial security is best achieved by rewarding those on the top in the hope that the lucre will somehow or another trickle down. And the despair we experience in witnessing all of this makes us crazy. It makes us angry. And yet we must not fall into the trap of denying our principles and returning like for like, or further alienating those who have been continued to be misled. Healing does not come from division, and community does not thrive in a petri dish of distrust and judgment. It's okay to be angry. It's a natural consequence of what we see happening around us. But just like the lion knew that it's pointless to argue with an ass, it's also important for us to remember that if we have any hope of having the donkey recognize the reality of green grass and join us in building a world where the grass really may be greener, we need to be in conversation. Referring to the donkeys we encounter with the more pejorative pseudonym is probably not a good starting point. The possibilities are as real as they are endless. We are called to be a people of respect. We are called to be a community of hope. We are called to be the bringers of peace and of justice. We are called to be the people of possibility. Blessed are the peacemakers. May it be so, and may you live in blessing. We're going to sing another song. This one's going to be in the little blue paperback hymnal. It's number 1023. Give everyone a moment to find it. Very often we sing this one as a round, but I'm not going to try to do that outside given the acoustic environment. It might be a little difficult. Let me ask you if you were able to stand, and let's try to sing out this morning and let the people online hear us. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all our voices and all our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Let's do it again. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. We could do it. We take a moment at this portion of our service every Sunday to speak to the concerns and the joys that are happening. We'll start with concerns. Maybe this is what I'm going to lead off here is maybe a concern and a celebration. And once again, normally would light a candle, but they're not going to stay lit long enough to matter. So, Connie Welton, who many of us here know, who was a member of this congregation for a long, long time, this past week moved back in with her daughter Jessica. And Jessica and her sister Caroline, obviously, as many folks know here, grew up in this congregation. Just recently bought a house up in East Hartford. And now Connie has moved out of the rehab facility where she's been for the last many months and is living back with Jessica. And Jessica posted a picture of Connie online the other day with a big smile on her face, looking so much better than I've seen her. That's sort of my both joy and concern for her continued recovery. If anyone else has a joy or concern that they would like to share, I'd ask you to come up and turn around and so that folks can hear.
I have a concern, but there's a bee by the microphone and I'm allergic, so I'm going to stand from here.
To be or not to be?
Be or not to be, yes. That's the question, actually. My father's been in a nursing home for 3 years, and he hasn't eaten or drinking in over 2 weeks. And things are looking like they're moving toward the end stages. My family's all throughout the country. He's in Florida, so communication between the family is kind of difficult. We're trying our best with a little difficulty, and any prayers would be helpful for Dad's comfort in the next couple of weeks and wherever it goes. George, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to celebrate some new faces that we see with us today. Thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you'll stay around and chat for a few minutes following the service. We call into our presence this morning those whose names we have mentioned, those who are part of the spoken joys and concerns, as well as those who we keep in the silence of our hearts. We bring the power and the love of this community to bear on all of those who suffer, and we extend this community out to them. Let us join together now in singing hymn number 23. In the low numbers are the big blue hymnal, and the high numbers are the little ones. So 23 is a low number. It's under 1,000.
120.
Is it 123? Typo on my program. Number 123, Spirit of Life. We'll play it through twice, Ellen. Spirit of life, come unto me, sing in my heart all the stirs of compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life for sake of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. We will now, if someone would like to take this basket, got a volunteer. And we will now receive our offering. Throughout the year, 25% of our undesignated cash offerings will go to our justice ministries. It's overseen by our Social Justice Council. Please give as you can out of your abundance. And while Steve is taking up the offering, I want to remind everybody that we are raising money as well for a new sound system. Hello, we're raising money for a new outdoor sound system. Did everybody hear that? As I said, if you were a little late coming, I came to bring our existing old sound system out this morning, and the microphone had fallen apart and was no longer functional. So like I say, I'm trying to use my outdoor voice this morning. But we are raising money for a new sound system, and for a lot of the services, when Tony's here, we've been using his, but obviously we can't always avail ourselves of that. So there's an online fundraiser. It's very similar to GoFundMe, but it's called, this fundraising platform is called Faithify. It's specific to Unitarian Universalism. We're already significantly on our way to reaching our $700 goal so that we can buy that new sound system. So if you have an opportunity, please go to our website and click on the link there which will take you to Faithify. And please, let's get it not only up to the point where we can buy that new sound system, but maybe have a little extra to replace the microphone that's missing from inside the sanctuary, and a few other things as well. Thank you for being here and contributing to this community of faith and this community of hope, and in keeping with our theme for the month, this community of possibility. Just take a moment before we end our service this morning for anybody who's just got something to say thank you for, to shout out a thank you for it. What are we thankful for this morning?
I'm thankful for my new expectant grandchild that I found out last week.
Another one! That's a new expectant grandchild for those who couldn't hear.
I just wanted to thank everybody who came to and had any help in setting up the concert we had yesterday. It was rained on powerfully, but we still had the dance floor. We had a great deal of fun, and the Dens did a terrific job, and it was great. I think we raised something above $700 yesterday for the Social Justice Council.
Great. That explains why there's pieces of disassembled dance floor all over the inside of the building. Any other thanks this morning?
I'm just thankful it's a great day.
Thankful for a great day. Thank you.
Thankful for being in remission 6 years.
Let's hear it for that. So now we will extinguish, and like I said, I promise you, it's still glowing. We will extinguish our virtual flame this morning. We take the warmth of the community, the flame of love and freedom of thought, the fire of justice with us as we go out into our community and live our lives amongst all people. Let us go in peace, and may you live in blessing.